All right, what's up, guys? Yeah, back with another video. So yesterday, I did a video on Roseanne Barr and the outrage over her tweet at Valerie Jarrett, and I basically said that Roseanne was being fired because of her politics, and not so much that the tweet was so offensive, but the fact that she doesn't have the approved political positions, and that if she was attacking Donald Trump, if she had the same politics as pretty much every other comedian who's on television, she would be fine. And in an effort to prove me right, Samantha Bee last night called the daughter of the President of the United States a feckless cunt. Her words. It was over immigration policy, and I don't know. I think it's a perfect example of everything we're talking about. I don't understand. I'll be the first to say I don't fully understand the outrage culture. I don't understand being outraged at comedians, but I don't know how you could possibly believe that tweeting at somebody that was a senior advisor and making a joke about Planet of the Apes because she kind of resembles the female character in Planet of the Apes, more of a comment on her haircut than it is a comment on her race, and then a Muslim Brotherhood joke, which, okay, look, you can say it's not racially sensitive for sure, but it's not exactly too sensitive to call a woman a feckless cunt either, and somehow that seems to be okay, and of course it's because Samantha Bee has the approved politics, which would be hatred of Donald Trump. The hypocrisy to me is overwhelming, and it's just, I said yesterday in the video, I said if Roseanne had come out and attacked Donald Trump and she had the approved politics, everyone would have been fine with it. And more or less that does seem to be what's happening with Samantha Bee. I mean, first of all, it should be noted that this was a publicity stunt, and maybe a fairly intelligent one by Samantha Bee. It's not like she wasn't thinking of the Roseanne comparison. She opened the segment with a joke about how she's on Ambien and she's about to have a Roseanne moment. So she was putting herself in that space, comparing her to Roseanne. But it's pretty amazing for someone like Samantha Bee, who will get into the game of being outraged. I mean, she was the first to talk about, Trump's sexist campaign and the sexist coverage of Hillary Clinton and all that stuff. But even once she's put herself into this space, she just feels so comfortable, like none of these accusations that they hurl at other people can come back to her. So she had no problem calling the president's daughter a cunt. And not for anything that Ivanka Trump is doing. It's for the policies of her father, particularly on immigration, and all these reports that have been coming out, which, by the way, were about Obama-era policies, not Trump policies. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Samantha Bee. I mean, look, if you don't see this as being a double standard, just ask yourself the basic question, which isn't too complicated, but what would the reaction have been if a comedian had come out and said that about Obama's daughters? I mean, this would be the #1 story in America. Everything else would screech to a halt, and this is all we'd be talking about. All right, fine, maybe Obama's daughters are a little bit younger than Trump's daughter, so okay, let's say it was about Michelle Obama. Let's say somebody with a national television show came out and said that about Michelle Obama because of one of Barack Obama's policies. Come on, the double standard is obvious, and this is the whole game. It's the outrage game that the left plays, where they're exempt from the rules, but everybody who doesn't share their politics is subject to them. I don't know. All I want is to just get out of this whole game. I mean, I don't think we should live in a world where we're outraged by comedians, and I don't I'm happy to live in a country that is a free country, and it's so free that a comedian can call the president's daughter a cunt. Okay, I'm fine with that, but you can't in the same breath say that Roseanne has to lose her job and then this is fine just because it's the political side that you like. That's just hypocrisy, and it's dangerous hypocrisy because it shuts down any dissenting opinion. Like I said yesterday in the video, I don't really have a lot of beliefs in common with Roseanne. I mean, Roseanne's a Trump supporter. I was not a Trump supporter. I am not a Trump supporter. Roseanne's a big critic of capitalism. I'm a big fan of capitalism. I believe she's into like labor and socialist issues, things that I don't agree with at all. But you know what I did like about Roseanne is that she was interesting. Roseanne's at least, it's like Samantha Bee, man. You could throw the topic out there and you already know what she's going to say about it. You could write her show for her. Roseanne, you get an interview with Roseanne and you don't know what the fuck she's going to say because she's interesting. And to me, that's what comedians are supposed to be. They're supposed to be funny and they're supposed to say things that you're like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. Oh, that's kind of wild. That's to me like comedy at its best. And if you're like, if you're just kind of like repeating the same thing that everybody else says, that's the comedy at its worst. It's what we in the business call hacky. And anyway, I've heard a few people who they use Kathy Griffin as an example to point out that, well, no, this can in fact happen to left-wing comedians as well. And it's like, okay, yeah, you have one example of it happening. And the reason why Kathy Griffin got in trouble is because she had a gig at CNN. She had a gig at CNN and she literally held an image of the president's severed head, ISIS style. So that's what it takes. That's what it takes on the other side. But like I said before, just imagine somebody saying this to Barack Obama about his family. This would be like the number one story. It's all people would be talking about. And the Samantha Bee thing is getting, I would say, minimal coverage. Okay, so what the other thing what I actually was more offended by than the feckless cunt comment, what I was more offended by with the Samantha Bee thing is that she said that Ivanka Trump should do something about her father's policy, kind of implying that she has control over her father, which is, just silly. But she said she should do something about it, and she said, tell him it's an Obama thing, and that'll make him not want to do it. Of course, the problem is that it was an Obama thing. And maybe if all you guys hadn't given him a pass on this, you would have a leg to stand on when you criticize Donald Trump for this stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. I am sympathetic to the actual argument. When they talk about, children being ripped away from their families, they talked about people being locked in cages and some of the just like, horrible humanitarian, treatment of these people or non-humanitarian treatment of these people. I get it. And it is really, really horrible. I think the major problem that most of the Trump haters are having is that, I consider myself kind of a Trump hater as well, but the mainstream resistance or whatever, like all the people who are anti-Trump, the main problem that they're having is that the true moral outrages that are going on under Trump, like the really, really heinous shit that's being done by the state as he presides over the executive branch of the government, they're all things that are being continued from the Obama administration. I think this is their biggest problem. If you want to look at the stuff that he's doing that Obama wasn't doing, you can find him, I don't know, making fun of a guy's arm or calling Rosie O'Donnell fat or like a comment about a judge. But if you look at the real humanitarian nightmares that are going on, they're pretty much all things he's continuing from Obama. The stuff with immigration, I mean, it's like, yeah, his rhetoric is a lot harder, but look, these reports just came out about all the stuff that was going on from 2009 to 2014. This was all under Obama's watch. It's not even clear if you look at the data from like 2015 to 2017. I think deportations are down, but arrests are up, and it's not really a drastic change. It's just Trump talks a better game about it. But if you're actually talking about the people whose families are being ripped apart, the people who are thrown in cages, all this stuff was going on under Obama. So it's just this moment where so many of the people that, like everybody I know on Facebook and all over, all my left-wing friends, it's like Obama was the greatest president ever. This is how they celebrated him as he was going out. Obama was the greatest president ever, and Trump is a nightmare. But, the problem with that is that all of the really horrible stuff was going on under Obama. Like, to me, it's I always focus on the wars because I think that's like the most horrific stuff that's happening, but like starving the people of Yemen to death or bombing the crap out of Syria or bombing Iraq, Afghanistan, all these things. I mean, some of them started under George W. Bush, some of them started under Obama, and Trump's continuing them. But it's pretty hard to stand there and say, oh, this guy is so horrible, And that last guy was the greatest president ever. This is a problem that the right had in this country. Like when the Tea Party was going on, like around 2009, 2010, when the Tea Party movement started up, and they would be like, oh, this spending, the government spending is out of control. And a lot of people on the left would very rightfully criticize them and say, well, what about when George W. Bush was doing it? He was spending through the roof, and you didn't say anything about that. And the people on the right in general had to take a look in the mirror and go like, yeah, you know what? We didn't say anything about that. And more or less, I actually think they've done a decent job in terms of like disavowing George W. Bush. You don't really hear that many people on the right, saying, oh man, that was really great. George W. Bush did a really great job. A lot of them defended him at the time, and they were wrong for that. But now looking back at it, I mean, look, Donald Trump stood up in South Carolina in the Republican primary debate and said George W. Bush was a disaster. He lied us into war. In South Carolina, the most military of states in the Republican primary, he looked right at the same people who were cheering George W. Bush on and said, he got your brother killed. He's the reason why. And the next day, they had a primary, and Trump took 60% of the vote, while the other 12 candidates or whatever split the other 40. More or less, that guy who lost his brother looked around and he said, yeah, you know what? Trump's right. Trump's right. He did lie. So, I don't know. That's, by the way, back in the Tea Party days, the whataboutism was, the left was fine with that when they were comparing things to George W. Bush. That's a different topic. But anytime someone brings up whataboutism, they're usually responding to what was an excellent point. So someone will be like, well, Trump did this. And someone will go, well, Obama did the same thing. Well, whataboutism? All right. It's actually just historical context and kind of demonstrating your hypocrisy. But anyway, that's the problem that I think a lot of the left-wing people who really supported Obama, who are really opposed to Trump have, is that they got to admit it. If you want to be outraged about this stuff, you got to admit that it was going on then as well. It's basically the same thing. It's a continuation of Obama's policy, which I will agree with you is horrible. But the honest progressives, the honest left-wing progressives, and there's like still 12 of them. It's like Jimmy Dore and Lee Camp and Ted Alexandro, maybe. All right, I'm out. But I think there's like 5 or 6 more of them. But they knew this stuff. These guys actually cared about it under Obama. That's why the immigration activists used to call him the deporter-in-chief. That wasn't a nickname for Trump. That was a nickname for Obama, and it was before Trump even really came onto the political scene, or at least way before anyone was taking him seriously. But if you really care about that, if you really care about the people, right, who are being ripped away from their families, people who are being thrown in cages, well, this is the state. This is the nature of the state. And libertarians have been making this point for a long time, particularly ANCAPs. And usually we're kind of like laughed off by the mainstream, or kind of like insulted, and usually not met with a counter argument, because they don't typically have one. But it's just kind of, oh, you crazy ANCAPs, you crazy libertarians. But this is the point that we've been making for a long time. It's like, this is the state. This is the nature of the state. This is what they do. They throw people in cages. It's really the only tool that the state has in its toolkit. It's like, yeah, we can throw you in a cage. We can say this is illegal. And what happens if you do that? You get thrown in a cage. Yeah, maybe there's like an intermediary step. Like maybe they'll say, this is a fine. And then it's like, okay, what if you don't pay the fine? No, you get thrown in a cage. That's all we have. So, yeah. This is what's going to happen if you put the state in charge of deportations, of enforcing a border, of any of these things. But it's not the only thing they throw people in a cage for. I mean, it's like, you'll get, the whole system is funded based on saying either pay your taxes or we'll throw you in a cage. If you don't pay your taxes, we throw you in that fucking cage. And oh yeah, if you have children, you're going to be separated from your fucking children. If you have a plant that we decided is on a list of non-allowable plants, you're going to be thrown in a cage. If you get some information that's not publicly known on a stock tip and you invest in it, you're going to get thrown in a cage. This is what they do all over the place. We're 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison population, and it's a whole lot of people in there for nonviolent crimes. So yeah, it's like this isn't like an area that's specific to immigration. This is what the state does. This is what the state does anytime you trust them to solve a problem. Well, they're going to throw people in a fucking cage. And it basically all comes down to what the most important question is, and this is the only question that really matters over whether you should be a libertarian or anything else, okay? It's like, who is it okay to throw in a cage and treat like an animal? And that's what you're seeing in those pictures of these immigration detention centers. It's treating people like fucking animals. And like, okay, maybe we do that to a rapist or a murderer or, somebody who bashes an old lady over the head and steals her purse. But, just doing that to somebody because they crossed over a border, yeah, it seems pretty harsh and pretty horrifically immoral. And that pretty much goes for all nonviolent crimes. So, again, I think the double standard is obvious. You can be morally outraged about this stuff, but the only way you're going to gain some legitimacy, to all the Trump haters out there, the only way you're going to gain any moral legitimacy is to go, yeah, you know what? Trump's doing some horrible stuff, but so was Obama. So was Obama. Obama bombing the crap out of third world countries, throwing people in cages for nonviolent crimes, deporting people. Even look at Obama's first term. He sent feds into California to shut down marijuana dispensaries and throw sick people in jail. It was an absolute moral outrage. And by the way, it's like, you want to talk about these people who are in cages, who are separated from their family. Okay, well, you know what? Even in these states where everyone's gotten cool now, right? Like everyone's like, oh, pot's legal. All the people who were thrown in jail for pot in the 80s and the 90s and in the first half of the 2000s or the first decade of the 2000s, they're all still sitting in jails. Nobody retroactively went back and said, oh, we're also going to let all that. Now that we realize that this should be legal, we're going to retroactively let all these people out of jail because, we're tearing them away from their families. We're treating them like animals and throwing them in a fucking cage. No one seems to want to do that. So that's my advice to the left. It was the same thing, by the way. It was my same advice during Obama to like the right-wing people, to the Tea Partiers. I used to say this to a lot of my friends who are on the right. It'd be like, hey, you want to oppose Obama? You want to actually have some like a moral foot to stand on? Then acknowledge George W. Bush was a disaster too. And of course he was. And so is Obama. And so is Trump. All right. That's it for today. See you tomorrow.